live?
We are almost live. Our mics are hot, but Natalie is just typing to me, which means she's probably typing and go.
And go, yeah. Yeah.
I'm just waiting. And so the idea after this, guys, is we'll take like a very short break and go downstairs, get you guys in the studio, and we'll do the actual panel, which will be more around the sort of 17 to 18-minute range.
Okay.
Come on in, Matt. That's okay.
Yeah, spread over 2 blocks.
Okay.
You guys want to get more?
Thank you very much.
Thank you
And
very
my
Jay?
cup's right there.
Okay.
So on top.
Here, Matt. Okay, we're live.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. So, hi there, everybody. I'm Adrienne Arsenault, one of the 37 hosts of The National. This is David Frum, the senior editor of The Atlantic and the former speechwriter, George W. Bush, although I know you're not often fond of people just describing you that way. There's much more to you than that.
Well, it's just, it is getting to be a while ago.
It is, a little bit, fair enough.
Millennials don't remember them.
Patti Solis-Doyle, you're a Democratic commentator and strategist, but you have also worked with the likes of Hillary Clinton,
Right.
Senior advisor to Barack Obama.
Yes.
Fair
And
enough.
Chief of Staff to Joe Biden.
Excellent.
So I'm a Democrat.
Yeah, that's pretty clear. So Jai Chabria, Republican strategist, but you were also an advisor really with John Kasich.
Yeah.
So there's an empty chair here just off of camera range, and that's because we are waiting for someone, Stephanie Brown James, who worked with Obama on the 2012 campaign. So this is a pretty high-powered group here, and they're here because we need to talk about the midterm elections. Yes, we're a country away, but some things leak across borders, and the impact of this election is one of those things that leaks across the border. So we need your questions, but we want to try to explain why this matters for you as Canadians, why it matters as citizens of the world. One thing I wanted to ask you, and we're going to have a panel tonight on The National, so this is a precursor to that, but one of the things we're going to talk about tonight as well is, depending on which podcast you graze, you will sometimes hear people say, this is the most important election of a generation. Is that fair? Patti?
You know, from my perspective, absolutely. I think in the U.S. right now, we're living through a real tumultuous time in terms of just the basic civility of our politics. You know, this president has injected race, sexism, misogyny into our everyday politics. And so for me, the midterm elections, and for much of the Democratic Party, which has been dubbed the resistance, we're longing for a repudiation, not just of Trump, but of these things that he's injected in our politics. Like I said, racism, sexism, misogyny. So for me, that's why I think this is a really important midterm election, probably the most important in my lifetime.
Okay, so let's establish what we're looking at. These are congressional races. So you've got the House of Representatives and the Senate. All the seats in the House are up for grabs. It's 435, I think.
Right.
In the Senate, you know, there are 35 seats up for grabs. Republicans control both of them right now. It is not writ that is what will happen after this election. We have... I've already got some questions. This is a relevant one. Regis Smith is asking on YouTube, can we trust the polls this time? So A, good question, Regis, can we trust them? But also, what are they saying, David?
You mean the opinion polls?
Correct.
Well, we are living through a period of crisis in opinion polling, that opinion polls are becoming less and less accurate over time, more and more difficult to do. And that's partly because of the fatigue. I mean, just think of yourself. If you get a call at home at dinner, do you pick it up?
Yeah, no.
Your parents probably did. Your grandparents for sure did. And so it takes more and more and more calls to get answers. And then people are more distributed. So opinion polls generally are becoming more expensive to do. And that one of the ways that polling companies cope with that is by shrinking their samples from 1,000 to 500 and then sampling more often. But that creates more sampling error. I think, yeah, I mean, they give you an impression, but you have to be really careful about relying on them, and more careful than you would have been in, say, 1985.
So on the polling, I think
Sure.
David's completely right. Polling is completely changed, and it's kind of a broken system. But political professionals, we use polling in a very different way than the media do. Or the media tries to say, well, this is who's winning. It's a horse race. Candidate X is winning over candidate Y. what we do is we look at it in terms of what's moving voters, what messages are moving voters, how do we get a winning strategy out there. So we may not know in a close election who's actually going to win, but we kind of have an idea, okay, well, that's really going to hurt us, but this is our counter, and this is how we're going to beat them back.
There's one other problem. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Well, I was going to say, I so agree with David and what he said, but I want to add to it in that, you know, young people, which in the United States right now, they're very engaged and they're very enthusiastic about these midterm elections. They don't have hard lines at home. They have cell phones, and they're much harder to reach. So I think that was one of the problems in the polling of the 2016 race. But I also want to say, for me anyway, as a political hack, I like to refer myself as, I think focus groups are much more important than opinion polls because you get a lot of nuance from a focus group. You know, that an opinion poll doesn't get you, like, you know, what's the horse race, or do you approve of this issue or don't approve of it. In a focus group, you get to talk to, you know, 10 people for a much longer period of time, and they give you a reason for their thinking and a reason for their opinions, and that really leads to much better, you know, calculations.
There's one other big problem with polling, which is polling tends to manufacture opinions that people didn't have before they got asked. And I was struck, for example, during the battle over President Obama's last nominee to the Supreme Court, a man named Merrick Garland. There were polls that purported to show that a majority of the American people wanted Merrick Garland to confirm to the Supreme Court, and then some smaller number did not want him. And I thought, to be really useful, that poll should have begun with this question. There's a man named Merrick Garland in the news. Why? And then the 5% who can answer the question correctly, then you ask them what they think about it. Right. So I think and you see in the Trump era, is a lot of the questions, I think people hear, you know, noise, 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 Donald Trump, noise, noise, noise. And then you get, you know, what you get. You get, you know, 58% dislike him and, you know, 40 or so like him, and that's the answer to everything, but it doesn't necessarily mean they have a question about the specific thing, they have an opinion about the specific thing you're asking them about.
Okay, so let's for a second leave what the polls may or may not say. What's the reality? And this is a question from LK. I don't know if that's your whole name. I'm thinking not. On YouTube, asking what pressure do the Republicans face? He's asking, or she's asking, about the Senate, but generally, what sort of pressure are they facing in both the House of Representatives and the Senate?
So I think let's go to the House of Representatives. I think a lot of the districts, and there's a lot that are up for grabs right now. So it's not 435 seats that are up for grabs. So I mean, I think all your viewers need to understand that too. There's a lot of districts that have been what we call gerrymandered to the point where one party's going to win it for sure and the other party's not, and so that's.
So technically, they are up for.
They're up for running,
election,
right? But they really can't be lost by the other party, or won by the other party, I should say. So there's about 50 to 70 seats that are up for grabs right now, and that's really going to say who's going to control the Congress. The thing that your viewers need to look at is going to be suburban women. Suburban women have, by and large, voted Republican in a lot of races in the past, and many of them are disaffected by the Republican Party. And many of them may stay at home. They may vote Democrat, but there are some that are going to vote Republican. So that's going to be, to me, in terms of control of Congress, not necessarily some of these other races, but in control of Congress, that's going to be really important because a lot of the districts that are up for grabs, that's where the key is. Okay,
so there's a question from Mike Sloan on Facebook. This is interesting. He's asking about Texas, and I have a feeling Texas is everyone's most interesting race. So you have Ted Cruz and a man named Beto O'Rourke. What sort of chance, Mike Sloan is asking, does O'Rourke actually have?
Well, the race is interesting because nobody in a million years would have thought that Ted Cruz would be in a competitive race. You know, it's right. Texas, it's red, it's Ted Cruz, he was going to win. Beto O'Rourke has made this a very, very competitive race. It's last polls I saw, I think, were, you know, some were within the margin of error. Some had Beto O'Rourke down by like 5-7 points, which is incredibly competitive for Texas. And Beto O'Rourke really sort of personifies that hope and change thing, I think, that Barack Obama personified when he ran in 2008. He's this come-out-of-nowhere candidate. He's not taking any PAC money. He's not taking any corporate money. He has rallies where 50,000 people show up. He posts his videos, you know, air drumming to the Who, going through Whataburger. He's a very personable, candidate, and he is the personification of the resistance in many ways that the United States is confronting. And if he wins, I think it will be seen as a total and complete repudiation of not just Ted Cruz, but more importantly of Donald Trump.
But
So Texas would not be at the top, though, of my list of states to watch
Right.
this election for a couple of reasons. First, something happened just today that may or may not prove relevant, which is tragically the Ted Cruz offices received some powdered, what apparently some kind of poison. Two people are in hospital. We don't know, at least I don't know, how seriously. I mean, it's a very sorrowful thing, very ominous. It's possible that it may have some political implication. But here's why I think that Ted Cruz is probably more safe than most of the Beto O'Rourke fans would imagine. There are two sort of driving forces changing things in this election. One is the very poor performance of Donald Trump among Latinos. I mean, America, if you think of America as a big set of blocks, which is kind of a crude way to think of it, the Latinos have been more up for grabs in the past 20 years than some other groups. And Donald Trump does very, very badly with them. But every indication we have is that Latino voters are not highly mobilized and highly motivated in 2018. My guess is Latino turnout underperforms in 2018.
Really?
Meanwhile, Texas, although it has a lot of suburbs and a lot of women, that Texas doesn't have a lot of the kind of knowledge centers. The Charlotte, North Carolinas, the Richmond, Virginias, it has Austin, but Austin is a small state compared to Houston and Dallas. So the kind of places where college-educated, somewhat affluent women voters who are disgusted with the president can turn, I'm sure that effect is happening in Texas, but they're less important in the Texas ecosystem than they are in some other places. So the state I think is more likely to be a surprise, if there is one, is Tennessee. Where Nashville has become, Nashville is hugely important, much bigger in that state than any city in Texas is, full of affluent suburbs. It's become a real knowledge center, healthcare, high technology, the music industry contributes, a lot of marketing, and a lot of the category that are going to cause the Republicans the most trouble, which is women with college degrees.
which is maybe why the president was just there.
Which is why the president is there.
But I think it's also worth saying about Texas is because it's such a close race, much closer than anybody thought. The Republican Party has to spend resources and time and money that
Really
they did
important
not think they had to spend in Texas. And that obviously takes away from places like Tennessee and Missouri.
Right.
And
That's super important because Texas is a money exporter
yes,
for the Republican Party.
exactly.
So I have a question from Facebook. I'm sorry I keep looking at my phone. I'm not checking. I'm not checking my Twitter feed. We're just getting lots of your good questions here. But Maureen Kathleen Gallant asked, this is a question about the Kavanaugh hearings. Can you, and I have to throw this to you as a Republican, but can you explain Jeff Flake's position from a larger perspective? So Jeff Flake, if you recall, he's the senator who was confronted by those women in the elevator, asking him to think again about whether he would vote for Kavanaugh, and he's the one who sort of pulled the trigger on, I think we need an FBI investigation.
Yeah. So Jeff Flake is resigning. He's leaving the Congress, and he went on 60 Minutes this last weekend, and he was asked, could you have done this if you were still going to stay in Congress? And he said, no, I couldn't. Look, what we're seeing in America is tribalism on steroids, and everyone, and it's not just the Republicans, it's also the Democrats too. It's if you get your news source from one place, you're going to believe one thing, and that goes for both sides. So I think what Jeff Flake, where his position is, he's trying to take a reasonable approach where he's talking to a friend of his who's a Democrat on the other side and say, let's put something on pause and let's take a look at it. But on the Kavanaugh thing, it's pretty strange. It's breaking down not necessarily on gender lines, and there may be some gender issues too, but there are hardcore Republican women that are infuriated by what they see going on with Kavanaugh.
Infuriated by what
that
part
they
of it?
see a person that they think might be raked over the coals with no evidence. And what pollsters are telling me, I know we're going back to the trusting of polls, what they're telling me in the last week, they're seeing numbers on the Republican side, enthusiasm numbers jump up in a way they haven't seen all cycle. So this is going to have an interesting way in which it's going to play in this midterm election. Suburban women, certainly they might be more disaffected, but if Republicans come out more in force because they see someone falsely
martyred.
being martyred, falsely accused, if that's the way they're reading it, it may close the gap on some of these races that are tight.
So
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
When you're looking at these polls about Republican enthusiasm, you're on a jaw of a pair of scissors, and you have to decide which part of the scissors is more important.
Right.
Because you can see in the past week rising Republican intensity, and as Jay said, there's a big Morning Consult poll that shows rising support among Republican women for Kavanaugh. Donald Trump, as often points out, was more popular among Republicans than Ronald Reagan was. At the same time, that's the numerator. Then there's the denominator, which is in the 1990s, about a third of Americans were Republicans, and today about 25% are. And the numbers, I think, are a little lower even for women than for men. So the Republicans are winning more and more of less and less. So when you see Republican women are more enthusiastic, what also happens is those women who are not enthusiastic about Kavanaugh are disaffiliating as Republicans.
Right.
But in the districts that we're talking about, the way they're drawn, it could make a difference in terms of Republicans doing better than we normally thought.
Okay, so two things. I just want to get to a couple of things because they're sort of starting to roll in
So
here.
many questions.
And lots of questions. I think we need to get to one here, which is that as we're interested, because I think we're political animals, as our pals here on Facebook, but as Canadians, why does this matter to us? And I'm looking at you, Mr.
Yeah,
Doyle.
what's the Canadian?
Well, I think that this is a week in which the answer to that question is pretty clear, and that is that North America has become one economy. Since the U.S.-Canada Free Trade Agreement in the 80s and since NAFTA, it's one economy. There's one car industry in North America. There's one agriculture industry in North America. And the United States looms larger in the Canadian economy than Canada does the other way around, although one of the things that was so, I mean, Mexico is such an important trading partner of the United States under NAFTA that, but there's a lot of people's livelihoods are at stake, just bluntly. And then there's another thing, and this maybe goes back to the very first question you posed. I'm sorry to give a long speech about this. When Patti's talking about how important this election is, you know, a decade ago, the world went through the worst economic crisis since the 1930s. And that last time we went through anything like this, it actually toppled democracies all over the planet. This time it didn't topple them, but it wobbled them, and they're all still wobbling. And the elections since 2008 are not just elections about who should govern, but they're elections about the system. And all over the world that you have seen, elections break down into choices between pro-system and anti-system candidates. In some places like Britain, both parties are now anti-system parties because, you know, the Tories are anti-Brexit and Jeremy Corbyn is anti, you know, the market economy. But so I feel the rate of wobbling is slowing down as prosperity returns after really a very frightening and upsetting decade for many people. But all of these elections are about the democratic systems worldwide. And although Canada was more lightly touched by the Great Recession than by almost any other democracy, and so the Canadian system has been stronger than almost anybody else. Nonetheless, there's this giant system next door, and it has been one of the most wobbly, and that has to be very concerning.
And there's no way you could know this or would need to know this, but we've just had a couple of provincial elections here where parties that were on the fringe or didn't exist before are suddenly becoming either the kingmakers or, as in Quebec, Coalition Avenir de Québec is now the majority. So with that exists here too. A couple questions as we were talking here. Alison Barkley, I think we kind of dealt with this. You asked if more people will be coming out to vote for the midterms. We sort of talked about that, I think, a little bit. Sean is asking, is the Senate up for grabs? Is it by default kind of decided? The Senate's an interesting race.
So the Senate, yes, the fact that there's a lot more safe seats that are in play for Republicans, which is a surprising thing, and it's where the Republican Party is going to have to expend resources. I think it's much harder to turn the Senate this election cycle to the Democrats than it is the House, but it is up for grabs. There are several seats. We mentioned Tennessee that are in contention, and so yeah, the answer is yes, it's up for grabs.
I think it's a very tough hill for the Democrats to climb to win back the Senate. They're defending 10 states that Donald Trump won. People like Donnelly in Indiana, Claire McCaskill in Missouri, they're in, you know, these races all are within the margin of error. But we have some opportunities in places like Nevada and Arizona where there are open seats and there are 2 women running in each of those states, and it's the year of the woman, and you know, if voter turnout is high, we have it's a tough hill to climb, but we have a chance.
But what is the Democratic Party we're talking about? What is the identity of it? I mean, Josh Michael is asking on Facebook, but this is a question a lot of us have, but I'll articulate it the way you have, Josh. If the Democrats do take the House and the Senate, maybe in the midterms, could there be a battle between old guard of Democrats and the new blood? And what is that battle? I mean,
The 2020 nomination process is that battle.
Is it sort of more Bernie than Hillary, sort of more Democratic?
We don't know yet. They're going to fight. They're going to fight it out. On November 7th, the day after the election, the 2020 nomination process for the Democratic nomination begins, and that's when it's going to get fought out. Now, it'll be, you know, we'll see signs in the results of the 2018 elections. You know, do we have more progressive winning in states like California, Florida? You know, do we have Gillum running in Florida for governor? Nobody thought he would win the primary, and he won. So folks will look and analyze the results of the 2018 election and see if the climate favors somebody like Elizabeth Warren, a more progressive, or a Bernie Sanders, or a Joe Biden, who's more moderate and can speak to working class people. But the battle for the identity of the party will happen during that 2020 nomination.
Does the Republican Party have a similar battle for its identity, or is it all about the president?
I think both parties are broken. I mean, I'm of the belief that both parties will look very different 10 years from now. The fact that Republicans are in power right now, there's more of a spotlight on the Republican Party, so I think that's why it's showcased. I look at the horizon, and Patti and I were talking a little bit earlier. I find it very hard to believe amongst the candidates that are talking about running for the Democrats right now that they have anyone that actually has an understanding of how to reach, message-wise, the large swaths of voters that were so disaffected by Hillary Clinton. And the traditional Reagan Democrats, you hear that term a lot, the traditional Reagan Democrats that are in Ohio and in rural America and places like that. I just don't see that they've got people that can do that. So I think but I think both are broken.
Michael Weatherly asking on Facebook, are the midterms always a referendum on a president?
They're usually a referendum on the economy. And one of the most interesting charts I saw was starting in the late 70s. You draw the line, and it's consumer confidence. How do you feel about the economy? And then the other line is the presidential approval rating. And they're not exactly the same, but they move. Like there's a constant level of difference. And basically, when consumer confidence is up, the president is up. When consumer confidence is down, the president is down. And when the president is up or down, his party or her party someday are up or down. That began to change in the middle 1990s. Partisanship became a stronger and stronger force, and so the president's approval rating sort of began to move away from consumer. And in the Trump year, it's completely broken free. These are the best consumer confidence numbers we've seen since, you know, the height of the dot-com boom. And yet the president has the worst numbers in his first 2 years of any president ever. I mean, very soon we'll no longer be able to say that because we'll be moving into Herbert Hoover and Jimmy Carter territory for year 3. But his numbers are terrible, and they're terrible without much respect, without much reference to the state of the economy.
Does that even matter, though?
Well, I have a private theory based on my gut.
It's public now.
It was private.
There's an economic problem that has become more and more visible to a lot of Americans, but invisible to the people who talk about politics, which is what's happening to consumer prices. So we've had a decade of almost no inflation, too little inflation. Inflation has begun to tick up. Over the summer, the consumer price increase, the consumer price index, which is not the only measure of inflation, in many ways not the best, but the one that people feel, it's now at about almost 3%. And that means mortgage interest rates are beginning to rise. And if you're in the educated part of the economy, your wages are rising faster than inflation. But if you're a non-supervisory worker, your wages are moving slower than inflation. And every time I write about this, even in the Atlantic, which is a pretty rarefied readership, I hear from people I've begun to notice my grocery bill. I got a note from someone who said, a woman who's a school teacher, that she used to, have a day where she went shopping and filled the car with gas, and now she does the shopping and she fills the car 3/4 of the way and hopes to drive less. I think that's sort of ticking along as a less addressed election issue.
That's a slow burn, though, right, David? I mean, it's not for this midterm election. I think people feel really good about where they are. Is that right? Don't you think?
I think I don't know how I've never seen a thing where they break out the non-supervisory, which is about 2/3 of the labor force, how you break those people out. But we know those are the people whose wages are falling behind prices, and it's been and actually they are earning, after inflation, less today than they were earning in the spring of 2017.
But aren't Republicans in a way going, when they go to the polls, say, I got my tax cuts, I'm probably going to get the Supreme Court nominee, I'm good, that's what I needed.
It's interesting. Polling is showing, the economy is doing very well in the United States, but polling is showing, and again, we've talked about whether we can rely on these polls, but polling is showing that the Republicans sort of lost the messaging on the tax cut. Most Americans believe that the tax cut favored the very, very rich, and that it didn't really affect their bottom line, most working class Americans. And then the president's personal, as David mentioned, personal favorability numbers are so low that this booming economy isn't really having that kind of effect. I got a job, I can pay my rent, I'm good. We're not seeing that. We're not seeing that in the special elections that we already had. Democrats are outperforming in record numbers in terms of people actually voting and voting for Democrats.
Okay.
Two notes on the taxes.
Sure.
One of the important elements, one of the few things the Republicans did to pay for the tax cut was to make it more difficult to deduct your state and local taxes from your federal taxes. Now that's not a concern for very large numbers of people. Who does it hit? Upper income professionals in high tax states, California, New Jersey, where there's still a number of Republican states. What basically happened was the hedge fund guys raised taxes on their accountants, and the accountants were Republican, and they are paying. If you are a professional couple and the kids have moved out of the house and you live in a place like Southern California or New Jersey, you didn't get a tax cut. Your taxes are higher, and you're probably kind of mad about it. And you were a Republican before, and maybe you're not now.
Okay, so we've got a couple questions that are sort of in the same vein. Sean Perry and Michael Legault are asking versions of the same thing. So Sean, you said, will voter dissatisfaction, I think about all the things you're talking about here, lead to a third-party movement, the likes of which the United States hasn't seen in a long time? And to follow that, Michael asks, would the U.S. actually be better with a third-party movement? Better off?
The Brookings Institution just did a big survey of this, a very interesting, subtle survey. They asked the question, would you like to see a third party? And about 60% of Americans said yes. I said, okay, tell us about this third party you'd like to see. So about a fifth said they would like to see a third party to the left of the Democrats.
Right.
And about a fifth said they'd like to see a third party to the right of the Republicans. And the problem is, we all would like the subway to stop in front of our house, but if told the subway's not going to stop in front of the house, do you want to pay for a new subway stop? Not necessarily. And so when you talk about this, we all imagine that it's obvious that what the content of this third party would be, and it would be what I want. But it may be something you like less, not something you like more.
Well, and we've had third parties in the American history before too. But what's happened is one of the other parties goes away. We have a two-party system, and that's just kind of the way it works for us too.
I have a personal theory that culturally Americans are, or culturally Canadians are less inclined to talk about who they vote for. I mean, it's a really hard thing to get a Canadian to tell you who they vote for. In part because we don't have to register for a party. It's not really in our DNA to officially, some do, but to officially register for a party. And I feel like we think it's none of your damn business to ask us who we vote for. And it makes it so hard, journalistically, to go into the States and realize that everyone wants to throw their voting pattern right at you.
Well, I think that was one of that psychology was one of the reasons why in 2016 we did not get accurate poll reads. I think because Donald Trump was who he was, there were a lot of people who, when they were polled, were a little embarrassed to say, I'm voting for Trump,
Because they're locked into the narrative,
So
right?
Exactly, because they're locked into the narrative. And so that reason, it's none of your damn business, is why I think, again, more polls are just not as effective as they used to be.
Well, that's interesting. All right, we can wrap. We're just about to wrap. Alison Barkley, you've come back for another question. I admire that. So let's do a roundup of everyone. She wants to know, what are the panel's predictions for who's going to win the midterms, if you can say it quite that broadly. Start with you, Patti.
Well, so for the midterms, there's winning back the House, and then there's winning back the Senate. And the House, I think the Democrats, all trends show that they're going to win it. We only need to win 23 seats in order to win back the House. We can start with the 25 seats that Republican districts that Hillary won. And now, as time progresses, we've gone to like 66 toss-up potential seats. So the numbers are in our favor. So I think we will win back the House, but not the Senate.
David?
I used to, years and years ago, I worked at the Wall Street Journal for an editor called Robert Bartley. Bob had a rule about financial prediction. If you give a number, don't give a date. If you give a date, don't give a number.
Okay.
But here, so I want to give a date. Today is October 2nd, and we've had this
Right.
explosive story
Yes.
in the New York Times. I think everything's going to be different on the other side of that. I think
it matters that much?
I think it is. Has the President of the United States committed massive tax fraud at the expense and to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars? I think that matters. And the question will be, I think we're about to have a big ballot argument about the question of how do you need a Congress that will hold the President accountable? Because
Right.
remember, according to the Times' reporting, although they're accusing the President of crimes, they're also saying the crimes, the most important of them, are outside the statute of limitations. They cannot be prosecuted. So the only check is Congress and political accountability. And that question, hold the President accountable or no, he's doing a good enough job, look the other way, that's about to become very defining. And I think I would have answered this question a little bit more confidently yesterday than I think I can today.
Interesting.
So I think David's right. This is a big story, but I'll also say we've had probably dozens upon dozens of big stories since this
have a big
man's been
story
president,
every day.
Donald Trump's
Yep,
been
every
president.
day.
So I think a lot of this is baked into voters' minds
Yeah.
in terms of where things are going. So as far as prognostication, it absolutely makes a difference for policy and for where things are going to go. But in terms of the House, I think Patty's right. I think the Democrats will probably take back the House. That's the way it looks. I think it'll be a narrow majority at the end of the day. That's my prediction. And I think the Republicans will keep the Senate and may actually even gain a seat or two, the way the races are right now, too. So I think the Republicans will do better in the Senate than the House.
Okay, Jai Chabria, David from Patti Solis-Doyle, thank you very much. Now, Facebook, here's the deal. There's a little transaction here. So they were kind enough to come in early to do this. Now we need you to watch National tonight because we're all going to gather again. Stephanie, I don't know where Stephanie is. Stephanie's just arrived. We'll see. You know what? We'll save Stephanie for the National tonight. Please tune in because we're going to hammer this out, and we will be seeing you. We've got 5 weeks to go, a few more times before that day, November the 6th. But for now, thanks very much.
Thank you.
We'll go refill
Thank
those
you.
water
It was
jugs,
fun.
and we'll
Thanks,
get our act together.
Facebook people.
Cheers.
Just remember, they can all still see you.
Yeah, we're just.
I love Facebook Live.
There you go.
They're the best ever.
You know what? Questions are good.
Yeah, they were
They were good. They were very
Very
good.
good.
They were really good.
And a very thoughtful amount of questions in terms
Yep.
of really wanting to try to understand things. Because like you said, I think with all of the, every day there's something big, and it's hard to know what's going to stick and what
Right.
matters and how it all plays. And
I'll be really.